The year 1207 dawned over Ethelberg, a town nestled in the verdant heart of the ancient kingdom, where the river Caelum snaked its way to the sea. Its spires were modest, its defenses stout but uninspired, and its spiritual heart, the old parish church of St. Jude, was a squat, weathered stone structure, mere fortress than sanctuary. Bishop Alaric, a man whose frame seemed too slight for the immense ambition that burned in his eyes, surveyed St. Jude's on a blustery March morning. Its Romanesque arches felt confining, its single low tower a whispered plea rather than a joyful shout to God. Ethelberg was growing, its market thriving, its guilds prospering. It was time, Alaric believed, for its spiritual edifice to reflect its ascendant spirit and to offer a bolder testimony of faith. The year 1207 dawned over Ethelberg, a town nestled in the verdant heart of the ancient kingdom, where the river Caelum snaked its way to the sea. Its spires were modest, its defenses stout but uninspired, and its spiritual heart, the old parish church of St. Jude, was a squat, weathered stone structure, more fortress than sanctuary. Bishop Alaric, a man whose frame seemed too slight for the immense ambition that burned in his eyes, surveyed St. Jude's on a blustery March morning. Its Romanesque arches felt confining, its single low tower a whispered plea rather than a joyful shout to God. Ethelberg was growing, its market thriving, its guilds prospering. It was time, Alaric believed, for its spiritual edifice to reflect its ascendant spirit and to offer a bolder testimony of faith. Alaric dreamed of light. He dreamed of soaring stone, of stained glass windows that would capture the very essence of heaven's glory and scatter it in jeweled patterns across the cold flagstones. He dreamed of a place where the human spirit could ascend, unfettered by earthly weight. He envisioned a cathedral dedicated to Saint Michael, the archangel, a beacon of divine strength and protection for his flock. His vision was met with a chorus of doubt and cautious enthusiasm. The town's burghers, men of coin and commerce, understood the prestige, but questioned the cost. The chapter of canons, custodians of St. Jude's, grumbled about disruption. But Alaric possessed an iron will beneath his gentle demeanor. He spoke of divine mandate, of an enduring legacy, of a spiritual engine for Ethelberg that would outlast kings and conquerors. He appealed to their piety, their pride, and their pocketbooks, promising eternal salvation for their contributions. Slowly, grudgingly at first, then with a growing swell of conviction, Ethelberg began to stir. The first master mason Alaric commissioned was a man named Ilara. He arrived in Ethelberg in the spring of 1208, a tall, intense figure, his hands calloused from years of shaping stone and guiding men, his mind a labyrinth of geometries and stresses. Ilara brought with him parchment rolls filled with intricate drawings, flying buttresses, ribbed vaults, lancet windows, all the revolutionary elements of the new Gothic style that was transforming cathedrals across the continent. His plans for St. Michael's were audacious, proposing a nave of unprecedented height, twin towers that would pierce the clouds, and a magnificent west front carved with the stories of salvation. The site chosen was a gentle rise overlooking the river, just to the east of the old church. A small village of temporary workshops and huts soon sprang up around it. The first task was immense.
preparing the foundations. Teams of men, mostly local villagers and indentured laborers, some skilled, many not, began digging. Pickaxes chipped at stubborn earth, shovels moved tons of soil, and countless wheelbarrows groaned under their loads. The air filled with the grunt of men, the creak of timber, and the constant rhythmic tap-tap-tap of hammer on chisel as the first rough blocks were shaped. Quarries, some many miles distant, were opened or expanded. Stone was painstakingly cut from the earth, often by men working in dangerous, cramped conditions. These colossal blocks, some weighing many tons, were then loaded onto specially constructed wagons or barges. The journey to Ethelberg was an epic in itself, requiring dozens of oxen and drivers, often taking weeks. The arrival of a new shipment of dressed stone was always a cause for a brief, weary celebration, a visible sign of progress. The initial years were a maelstrom of activity and relentless toil. Foundations sank deep into the earth, a hidden testament to the sheer effort. By 1215, the crypt was nearing completion, its sturdy arches holding the promise of the majesty to come. Bishop Alaric, though aging, was a constant presence, his slight figure often seen among the dust and din, offering encouragement, resolving disputes, and reminding everyone of the divine purpose of their labor. Ilara, the master mason, was equally tireless, a whirlwind of calculations, supervisions, and sudden, precise instructions. He knew every block, every joint, every angle. But even divine purpose could not entirely shield them from earthly woes. The year 1218 brought a harsh winter, freezing the river and the quarries, halting progress for months. Supplies dwindled, and the morale of the laborers, many of whom relied on daily wages, began to fray. Financial anxieties, ever present, tightened their grip. The king, embroiled in distant wars, offered little support, his focus elsewhere. Then tragedy struck. In 1220, as the first courses of the choir walls began to rise above ground, a sudden violent storm lashed Ethelberg. High winds tore through the scaffolding, sending timbers crashing down. Ilara, inspecting a newly laid course, was caught in the collapse. He died beneath the splintered wood and falling stone, his visionary plans scattered, his life extinguished, a testament to the unforgiving nature of their work. Bishop Alaric was devastated. Ilara had been more than a master mason. He had been a co-conspirator in a holy endeavor. For months, the site fell into a mournful hush. The sound of chisels faded, replaced by the wind whistling through the half-built structure. Many feared the project was doomed, a grand dream turning to an unfinished monument to human hubris.
But Alaric, though heartbroken, refused to yield. He believed God had called him to this task. He sought a new master mason, a man who could not only continue Ilara's vision, but infuse it with his own skill and spirit. After a long search, he found Master Stefan, a younger but highly respected mason from a distant city. Stefan arrived, studied Ilara's plans, and, with a few judicious modifications to improve structural integrity and introduce new stylistic nuances becoming popular, took up the mantle. Under Stefan's leadership, the work slowly resumed. By the time Bishop Alaric passed away peacefully in 1228, looking out from his window at the slowly rising walls of St. Michael's, the choir and its radiating chapels were taking shape. The lower sections of the immense east window, designed to flood the altar with morning light,
were already being fitted with their first panes of colored glass, rich blues and fiery reds. Alaric's successor, Bishop Thomas, was a practical man, less given to soaring visions, but equally committed to the task. He understood the prestige St. Michael's would bring and the spiritual anchor it provided. The next 50 years saw the steady, grinding progress of the choir and transepts. Generations of stonecutters, masons, carpenters, and laborers dedicated their lives, their skill, and often their very health to St. Michael's. Boys who started by fetching water grew into men who carved gargoyles and hoisted massive stones. Families lived and died in the shadow of the rising walls. One such family was the de Marigny family. Old Jacques de Marigny had been a quarryman, his muscles like knotted rope, his face perpetually dusted with stone grit. His son, Jean, became a skilled mason, specializing in intricate tracery. Jean's son, Antoine, born in the mason's village next to the cathedral site in 1250, apprenticed as a carver of grotesques and angels. Antoine had a mischievous eye and nimble fingers, and his work could be found peeking out from corbels and archways, small, often humorous faces among the solemn saints. He knew every secret passage, every hidden nook, every resonant chamber of the growing structure. The cathedral was his world, his heritage, his future. By the mid-13th century, Ethelberg itself was changing. The cathedral, even unfinished, was drawing pilgrims, boosting trade, and establishing the town as a regional center of faith and influence. The merchants, once skeptical, now proudly contributed to its funds, their names often subtly carved into the plinths of donor statues. Royal charters granted new privileges, enhancing Ethelberg's autonomy and prosperity. Master Stephan, after decades of dedicated service, eventually retired, his back bent, his hands arthritic, but his heart full of quiet pride. His successor, Master Philip, a former apprentice of Stephan's, oversaw the completion of the transepts. The crossing, a monumental engineering feat where the nave, choir, and transepts met, was a source of constant anxiety. The sheer weight of the impending tower, the outward thrust of the vaults, all had to be meticulously calculated and buttressed. Philip spent sleepless nights, poring over plans, checking every measurement. In 1275, after nearly 70 years of construction, the choir and transepts were consecrated. It was an immense celebration. Bishops from neighboring dioceses, local nobility, and thousands of townspeople crowded into the still raw stone spaces. The sunlight, streaming through the newly installed stained glass, painted the rough walls with ethereal colors. The sound of plain song soared heavenward, a sound many had only dreamed of hearing within those walls. Though the nave and towers were still but a dream, this partial completion was a monumental triumph, a proof of perseverance. The focus then shifted to the nave, the vast central body of the church where the congregation would gather. This was perhaps the most challenging section, demanding not just immense scale, but also a sense of progression towards the consecrated east end. Master Philip began the work, meticulously laying out the foundations for the nave piers, but he would not live to see its completion. The late 13th and early 14th centuries brought new challenges. Famines periodically gripped the land, reducing the workforce and diverting funds to feed the hungry. The great hall of the Masons' Lodge, usually bustling, would sometimes fall quiet, the men too weak or too few to work. The rhythms of construction were dictated not just by stone and mortar, but by harvest and hunger. Bishop Edmund, who took the episcopal throne in 1301, was a scholar and theologian. He insisted on the highest artistic standards, commissioning a new generation of carvers and glaziers to adorn the nascent nave with ever more intricate details. Antoine de Marigny, now an elder master carver, taught his own son, Henry, the delicate art of breathing life into cold stone. Henry, unlike his father's playful grotesques, favored delicate foliage and realistic portraiture in his carvings, a reflection of the changing artistic tastes. The de Marigny family was now inextricably linked to the fabric of St. Michael's, their hands leaving an indelible mark across generations. Then the whisper of war began to drift from across the Channel. The 100 Years' War, a slow-burning conflict between England and France, periodically flared, drawing away men and resources, raising taxes, and unsettling the kingdom. Ethelberg, though not a primary target, felt the distant rumblings. Building supplies became harder to procure, and skilled masons, lured by better pay or simply avoiding conscription, sometimes disappeared. But nothing, not famine, not war, not even the gradual natural attrition of time and death, could have prepared Ethelberg for the horror that arrived in 1448, the Black Death. It swept through Europe with terrifying speed, indiscriminate and utterly merciless. Ethelberg, a thriving trade hub, was hit hard. The town square, once bustling, became a silent testament to terror. The cathedral site, usually a hive of activity, fell still. The sounds of hammering and chiseling were replaced by the tolling of death bells, ceaseless and mournful.
Master Roger, then the reigning master mason, was among the first to fall. Then came his 2 chief foremen, then many of the skilled masons and stonecutters. The village of the masons, once a vibrant community, was decimated. Survivors fled to the countryside, seeking refuge from the invisible killer. Construction halted entirely. The half-built nave stood stark and skeletal against the sky, a monument not to faith, but to profound human loss. It was as if God had abandoned them. When the plague finally receded, leaving behind a scarred land and a drastically reduced population, Ethelberg was a ghost of its former self. Less than half its inhabitants remained. The survivors were traumatized, their faith shaken, their lives irrevocably altered. Bishop Gregory, who had buried most of his chapter, looked upon the cathedral not with despair, but with a renewed, desperate determination. St. Michael's, he resolved, would be a symbol of their resilience, a testament to God's enduring mercy in the face of such devastation. But the challenges were immense. Labor was scarce and expensive. The remaining skilled masons were few and aging. Apprenticeships had been interrupted. The economic life of Ethelberg was crippled. For decades, progress on the cathedral was agonizingly slow, often limited to essential maintenance and minor repairs. The existing structure, exposed to the elements, suffered. Stonework eroded, timber warped, and the magnificent stained glass, left in a state of partial installation, began to show the ravages of time and neglect. It was during this desolate period that a remarkable woman emerged.
Lady Eleanor de Montaigne, a wealthy widow and devout patron, poured her substantial inheritance into the cathedral. She saw not just stone and mortar, but the very soul of Ethelberg, wounded but not broken. Her unwavering financial support, coupled with the tireless efforts of a new, pragmatic master mason named Gerard, slowly, painstakingly brought life back to the site. Gerard was a man of immense patience and ingenuity. He adapted to the scarcity of skilled labor by simplifying some of the more elaborate designs, while still preserving the overall Gothic grandeur. He developed innovative scaffolding systems that required fewer men to erect. He instilled a sense of purpose in the few remaining workers, reminding them that they were rebuilding not just a church, but a community, a future. Antoine de Marigny's grandson, Thomas, was one of Gerard's apprentices. Thomas had been orphaned by the plague, his parents, Henri and Marie, both cathedral workers, having succumbed. He had seen the terror, the loss, the silence that had fallen over Ethelberg. But he also saw the unyielding strength of the cathedral stone, its silent promise of endurance. He threw himself into his apprenticeship with a fierce devotion, learning every facet of masonry, carving, and geometry. He felt the weight of his ancestors' legacy on his shoulders, a sacred trust. By the late 13th century, more than a century and a half after Bishop Alaric's initial vision, the nave was finally beginning to take its definitive form. The soaring arcades, the elegant triforium, the clerestory windows, all were slowly rising, column by column, arch by arch. The sheer scale was breathtaking. Standing beneath the half-completed vaults, looking eastward towards the consecrated choir, one could begin to grasp the magnificent vision that had sustained so many generations. The construction of the vaults was a terrifying endeavor. Gigantic wooden centering, intricate and complex, was erected to support the stones of the ribs and webbing, until the keystone was locked into place, making the arch self-supporting. Accidents were common. The fear of a collapse, of the massive timbers giving way, hung over every team of masons working high above the floor. Thomas de Marigny, now a respected journeyman, worked on the high vaults, his heart pounding not just from the exertion of hoisting stones, but from the dizzying height and the immense responsibility. Each stone was a prayer, each joint a testament to skill and faith. The late 13th century also brought significant social unrest. Peasant revolts, fueled by the economic shifts after the plague and heavy taxation, swept through the kingdom. While Ethelberg remained relatively untouched by direct rebellion, the turmoil created an atmosphere of uncertainty. Wealthy patrons became more cautious, donations sometimes faltered, and the continuous flow of resources, so vital to such a colossal undertaking, became erratic. Bishop Richard, a man of profound humility and shrewd political instincts, navigated these turbulent waters with grace. He actively engaged with the townspeople, listening to their grievances, offering solace, and reminding them that the cathedral was their shared heritage, a tangible manifestation of their collective identity and enduring faith, a refuge in troubled times. He commissioned works of art for the growing cathedral that depicted not just saints, but also ordinary people, their faces etched with the struggles and triumphs of their lives, reflecting the deep connection between the sacred and the everyday. By 1400, 2 centuries after its inception, St. Michael's of Ethelberg was nearly completion. The nave was roofed, its vaulting a triumph of engineering and artistry. The great west window, filled with vibrant scenes of the Archangel Michael's battles, allowed the setting sun to cast a glorious, fiery light into the church, illuminating centuries of work. The interior, though still lacking many of its decorative elements, was a magnificent space, inspiring awe in all who entered. But the external facade, particularly the twin west towers, remained incomplete. They rose only to the height of the nave roof, squat and unfinished, their intended spires mere ghosts in Alara's original drawings. It was a constant reminder of the unfinished dream, an unspoken challenge to each generation. The early 15th century saw a renewed burst of energy. The kingdom, though still embroiled in the 100 Years' War, enjoyed periods of relative stability. A new master mason, Master Estienne, a man of boundless energy and innovative ideas, took charge. Estienne possessed a profound respect for the original plans, but was also unafraid to introduce the latest architectural advancements. He envisioned taller, more elegant spires than originally designed, pushing the boundaries of what was structurally possible.
His greatest challenge was securing the necessary funds and labor. The memory of the plague still lingered, and the lure of other, faster-to-complete projects sometimes drew away skilled hands. Etienne, however, was a charismatic leader. He rallied the town's guilds, appealing to their civic pride. The Goldsmiths' Guild pledged to fund one of the great rose windows, the Weavers' Guild another. The powerful Merchants' Guild took on the substantial cost of raising the South Tower. Thomas de Marigny, now in his 70s, had retired from active carving, his eyes failing, his hands trembling. But his mind was as sharp as ever, a living archive of the cathedral's history. He spent his days in the Masons' Lodge, advising Master Etienne, sharing his vast knowledge of the original construction, pointing out subtle shifts in the stone, recalling the challenges of previous generations. He was the bridge between the distant past and the hopeful present. His son, Jean-Luc, had become an accomplished master glazier, his work adorning many of the nave windows, and his grandson, young Gabriel, was already showing promise as an apprentice carver. The de Marigny lineage, like the stone itself, had deepened its roots within St. Michael's. The construction of the towers was a monumental undertaking. Each stone had to be hauled hundreds of feet into the air using treadwheel cranes, operated by men walking inside giant wooden wheels, their muscles straining, their breaths coming in gasps. The work was slow, dangerous, and exposed to the full force of the elements. Winds howled around the dizzying heights, rain lashed, and winter ice made every step perilous. Yet the men pressed on, driven by a collective determination to see the project through. The stone for the upper sections of the towers came from a particularly fine quarry known for its pale, almost luminous limestone. This stone, lighter in color than the older, darker stone of the lower walls, meant that the towers would shimmer against the sky, a deliberate architectural choice by Etienne, symbolizing the ascent towards the heavens. In 1445, after nearly 20 decades of relentless effort under Master Etienne, the South Tower was finally topped with its delicate, open-work spire. It was a moment of sheer exhilaration. A small flag bearing the emblem of Ethelberg was ceremoniously hoisted to its peak, fluttering proudly in the breeze.
The sound of the new bells, specially cast for the tower, rang out across the Caelum Valley for the first time, their joyous peal carrying the news far and wide. The North Tower, however, proved more problematic. A subtle instability was discovered in the bedrock beneath its foundations, requiring extensive and costly reinforcement. Work slowed again, testing the patience of the patrons and the resolve of the workers. Bishop Anselm, a man of deep piety but limited financial acumen, struggled to secure the necessary funds. He often resorted to impassioned sermons, reminding his flock of the spiritual merit of contributing to God's house. It was during this period of renewed financial strain that a young, ambitious canon named Father Julian rose to prominence. Julian was a shrewd administrator, a charismatic speaker, and a tireless fundraiser. He organized pilgrimages, launched new indulgences, and appealed directly to the rising merchant class, framing their contributions not just as acts of piety, but as investments in the very future and prestige of Ethelberg. Under his guidance, the coffers slowly began to fill again. The final 2 decades of the 15th century saw the culmination of 3 centuries of effort. Under Master Guillaume, Etienne's successor, and a man equally devoted to the grand vision, the North Tower, reinforced and strengthened, began its ascent. Its design mirrored the South Tower, ensuring a harmonious west front. The internal decoration of the cathedral, long delayed, also received renewed attention. Stained glass windows depicting local saints and benefactors were commissioned. Altars were carved with exquisite detail. Murals, though less prominent in Gothic architecture, adorned some of the chapel walls, depicting vibrant scenes from the lives of saints. Gabriel de Marigny, now a master carver of considerable renown, found himself undertaking one of the most significant commissions of his career, the intricate carving of the main portal of the west front. For years he labored over the tympanum, depicting the Last Judgment and the numerous figures of saints and prophets in the jambs. He poured into it all the skill passed down through his family, all the history he had witnessed, all the faith that had sustained St. Michael's. Each fold of drapery, each expression of joy or sorrow, each leaf of foliage was imbued with meticulous care. He felt the weight of 3 centuries of hands that had shaped this very stone, the silent presence of his ancestors.
Finally, in the year 1507, 300 years after Bishop Alaric had first gazed upon St. Jude's and dreamt of glory, the last stone was laid atop the finial of the North Tower. The bells of both towers pealed in unison, a deafening, joyous cacophony that echoed across the valley. From the highest point, a small, weary Master Guillaume watched as the flag of Ethelberg, now a flourishing city, was raised. He looked down at the vast, sprawling cathedral beneath him, a testament not just to stone and mortar, but to the unyielding spirit of generations. The dedication ceremony was unlike anything Ethelberg had ever witnessed. Pilgrims flocked from across the kingdom. The king himself, accompanied by his court, rode into the city under triumphal arches. Cardinal Julian, the former Father Julian, now a prince of the church, presided over the magnificent ceremony, his voice resonating through the perfected vaults. The interior of St. Michael's was ablaze with light and color. The light filtered through hundreds of stained glass windows, danced across the floor, illuminating the polished stone, the vibrant murals, the newly gilded altars. The air was thick with incense, the sound of the choir angelic, the grandeur overwhelming. The nave, once a dream, now comfortably held thousands of worshippers, their faces upturned in awe and reverence. Gabriel de Marigny, now an old man, stood among the crowd, his eyes, though dimmed by age, still capable of appreciating the immense beauty he had helped to create. He saw not just the finished cathedral, but the ghost of every mason, every carver, every laborer who laid a stone, hewn a timber, or shaped a pane of glass. He saw Bishop Alaric's vision realized, Master Ellera's geometry brought to life, the perseverance of generations overcoming plague and war. He saw the marks of his own hands and the hands of his father, his grandfather, his great-grandfather, woven into the very fabric of the edifice. The cathedral was a living history book, each stone a paragraph, each window a chapter. St. Michael's of Ethelberg stood complete, a colossal work of art and engineering, a monument to faith and human endurance. It was a triumph not of a single individual, but of a collective will that transcended centuries. It was a story told in stone and glass, a whisper of dreams, a roar of triumph, echoing the voices of 1,000 forgotten souls who had, brick by brick, carved a piece of heaven into the very earth. And as the final benediction was given, and the sun set, casting the long shadow of the cathedral across the now thriving city, it was clear that the story of St. Michael's was not just about a building, but about the enduring spirit of humanity itself.